Welcome back. We're still looking at Chapter 2, but now it is Part 2. We're going to be continuing to look at who our students are, and we're going to begin focusing on economic diversity. By economic diversity, I mean students who come from low-income families. So before we start to take a look at how low income might impact student learning, let's take a look at about how many families are we talking about. So this data below is from the census in 2016, and it is showing families who come from low income, and it is also broken it down by ethnic identity to give you an idea of families. You might also have the question of, well, what do we mean by low income? What exactly is considered poverty? So below I have the 2020 poverty guidelines. This is based on the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So you can see, for instance, a family of 4 is $26,000. So how does this compare to what's going on in the state of Ohio? So the median household income for a family according to the U.S. Census in Ohio is $51,000. Obviously, that was 4 years ago. Franklin County, which is where Columbus is, slightly higher than average. You would expect that. It's $52,000. Look at Athens County, $33,000. Athens County is the poorest county in the state of Ohio and has been so for multiple years. So how do schools classify a student as low income? What they typically do is look at the guidelines for the free and reduced lunch program. So in order to be eligible for free or reduced lunch, your family needs to be below 130% of the federal poverty level, which means you can be slightly above the poverty level. For instance, in 2018-19, for a family of 4, that would be a household income of $32,630 or less. So again, back to our question, how might SES affect student learning? Now, if you're not familiar with the term SES, that is socioeconomic status, which refers not just to income, but also to family's educational level. All right, I want you to imagine something. It's the first day of school. Think about what your first day of school was like for yourself. Now imagine a student from a low-income family. You don't have a backpack. You don't have all of your school supplies. You haven't even had breakfast, and you're headed off to the first day of school. How might that impact how you feel or how you learn? Below are 2 examples, and these are pretty standard and short examples of supply lists. There are a large number of families out there who simply cannot afford to buy all of these school supplies. This is why schools often have programs to collect school supplies to assist these families. This is a great thing to donate to. If you're working with any student organizations at OU, this could be a great cause for you. I want to show you a short video of Cleveland, a particular school in Cleveland, what they're doing to help families.
Well, guess what? Today was the first day of school for many Cleveland students, and one group is building a better land by helping our youngest students get the education they deserve. Now, it starts with making sure confidence is present in the classroom. That's why Shoes and Clothes for Kids is filling backpacks and closets. When teachers become students, that's when they catch on.
I think, if you've never had this issue, you don't think about it.
Poverty is a heavy burden at Whitney Young that many kids carry to school. The load can weigh down any future.
Right now, we're in a place to where we're struggling right now.
Rosetta Davison says tough times live at home.
And this program is a blessing for not just me and my children. It's a blessing for all children.
Shoes and Clothes for Kids is the program that is a part of the curriculum. Terry Yule runs it.
About 1,000 kids a year over the 3 years, grades K through 3 in 5 CMSD schools.
Every student who needs one gets a package, including school supplies, 2 uniforms, underwear, and a winter coat. Even a voucher for shoes.
Running around the school without any shoes on.
At every step, these gifts are erasing distractions because dirty clothes were keeping kids from school.
Any child that doesn't make it to school more than 10 times a year is probably not going to move to the next grade.
And a brand new outfit. They have the confidence to learn.
45.
That's how many books second grader Passion Brown read over the summer. Terry says staffers aren't just handing out these packages, they're also monitoring third grade reading levels among students to gauge progress.
Who's to say the sky's the limit?
This school supply list digs beyond store shelves.
It's clear that we may not have prioritized years ago all the things that really were important.
Reaching into the closet and exposing the desperate truth.
I think that's a great example of what schools can do to help students from low-income families. So let's take a look at some of these educational impacts. Students from low-income families are more likely to have low test scores. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to why, whether it comes from the opportunity gap, whether it comes from lack of educational resources, but regardless, the gap is there. So you can see here from this data, so we have 4th grade students and we have 8th grade students, and this is from Ohio. I try to relate things to our state as much as possible. And then here you're seeing the gap between the non-economically disadvantaged students and the economically disadvantaged students. And you can see in each case there's a significant gap. So what else can we see? In addition to having lower test scores, these students also are more likely to attend schools that are either unsafe or simply underfunded. So the schools may not have adequate resources and the students may not feel secure enough to be in a good learning environment. Students from these low-income families are less likely to be expected to go to college. Now, this could be because the families are hoping that their children will graduate from high school and start getting a job and earning some income, or perhaps it's just simply different educational expectations. But you can see here from this data is simply looking at college enrollment across 2-year and 4-year institutions from recent high school grads. And then it's trying to see, okay, well, there is a decrease. Why is there a decrease? What's going on? Up here, you can see high-income students, middle-income students, and low-income students. So yes, there was a gap every single year, but you can also see a significant drop in more recent years. Although I do recognize this data is a bit old. So students from low-income families are less likely to be picked as a leader, both inside and outside the classroom. Now, we don't know if this is due to some sort of implicit bias, but regardless, observational studies have found this distinction. So keep this in mind, even when you're choosing small things like line leader. Line leader may feel small to you, but it is a very big deal to little kids. All children need the opportunities to be leaders. Students from low-income families are also less likely to be assigned to AP courses or gifted courses. Now, this could simply go back to that achievement gap, which then might relate to differences in opportunities, but still this is a difference that we're seeing that needs to be addressed. And finally, they're less likely to be encouraged to participate in extracurriculars and sports. Perhaps coaches aren't certain if the students have the financial resources. Some of these sports are quite expensive. But again, schools need to be providing equal opportunities to their students. Here's one graphic that I found trying to show some data comparing students from a household income of less than $60,000 to a household income of over $60,000. And you can see in both instances a difference in their participation. While we're still under this topic of economic diversity, what about homeless students? To be honest, if you come from a rural or a suburban area, this may be something you have not given much thought to, the idea of public school students who are homeless. Now, one of the ways we tend to see this is homeless teenagers. Now, homeless teenagers might be purposefully leaving home because they're trying to avoid an abusive situation, issues with drugs and alcohol at home, or simple family dysfunction. But I thought I'd ask the question, how many homeless K through 12 students do you think there are in the state of Ohio? So just Ohio, how many? If you guessed the 27,000 number, you are correct. I don't know about you, but I was quite surprised at that number. That's very significant number of homeless students. And here's a map showing their location across Ohio. I could not find one that did not have the text over top of Columbus, but obviously there are a significant number in Columbus. Here's a short video talking about ways to support homeless students.
My daughter, she's 15, and she wants to become a forensic psychologist.
A forensic psychologist is enough to make any parent proud, but Samika Kamen has an even bigger reason to smile. Her children are doing great in school in spite of the fact that they were homeless for 3 years.
Keeping them involved and keeping their focus off of being homeless really kept them focused.
Samika also had a program called Project ACT on her side, Action for Children and Youth in Transition. The program served more than 3,000 homeless Cleveland school students last year, some in shelters, providing them with whatever they needed to succeed.
Clothing cards and vouchers for clothes and winter coats and food.
There are also life skills coaches in schools with high numbers of homeless students, working one-on-one with them to build self-esteem and academic success. Director Marcia Zashin says research indicates that children who are living in poverty, especially homeless children, are usually 2 to 3 years behind their peers who have stable environments. But parent involvement can greatly improve those odds.
We are finding that by working with the child's teacher, working with the child's parent, we are seeing that our children are succeeding and doing much better academically.
Out of 96 seniors who were homeless last year, 76 graduated and 63 went on to college or trade school. 2 got full rides to major universities. And Samika Kamen is working now and no longer homeless.
I want you to think for a moment about that number they just said. So 96 high school seniors in Cleveland were homeless. That's quite a number. So spread that throughout the entire state, especially in urban areas. While looking at homeless teens, 1 in 10 of these teens are considered to be couch surfing. So what they're doing is they're not staying in homeless shelters. They're not out on the street. They're simply staying with different friends, hopping from couch to couch. While we're looking at homeless students, I do want to point out that public schools still do have an obligation to provide transportation, so to provide bus service from the location where the students are, and they also cannot deny enrollment if these students lack some of that so-called essential paperwork that you would usually need to enroll in schools. There are a lot of schools out there that provide programs not just for homeless students, but for all students from low-income families. Here's Alexander Elementary School near Athens, where they're doing a clothing and hygiene bank. But I thought I'd also talk about what can teachers and schools do to provide equity for these students. So my list is not all inclusive, but let's start with bias. You need to look for not only bias in yourself, bias among the other students in the school. Do what you can to confront and eliminate that bias. Try to build good relationships with your students and their parents. Some schools will have evening activities, weekend activities, just simply to try to connect to those parents and families. Have empathy for your students. Consider their background, consider where they're coming from, consider what their needs might be. If you have a homeless student, for instance, most likely there's a chance they could be tired in class because they may not be getting a good night's sleep. Students from low income might have a hard time paying attention because they might be hungry. I love this quote here below, that every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. There's a lot of research on resilience that says in order to establish resilience in a child, for them to overcome poverty, one of the biggest things they need is one adult. Just one adult who cares, who holds them to a high expectation, and who checks in on their learning. Hopefully that would be a parent, but if not, it can be a teacher, a coach, a principal. Try to provide appropriate support, educational support, so that they can reach your high expectations. One of the worst things you can do is lower your expectations. Studies show that nobody benefits from lowered expectations. So maintain your high expectations, but provide appropriate resources to help them reach that. Whether that might mean tutoring, additional assistance, differentiated instruction in the classroom. I love this. So this is where Columbus City Schools recognized a need over the summer. Learning does really drop over the summer, and then there's a lot of catch-up students have to play in the fall. So they offer some summer enrichment courses to prevent that kind of educational loss. As we continue, we've got a short video looking at schools and some of the things that they're doing to try to assist students from low-income families.
For children living in poverty, the odds are against them. But ASCD's new video, featuring author Eric Jensen, will show you how to beat those odds with smart, purposeful engagement strategies designed to help economically disadvantaged students graduate college and career ready.
When kids are not engaged, they drift off into what you and I would call counterproductive states, metabolic states. For example, apathy or boredom. Engagement keeps the metabolic process going.
So let's practice and work on our memory with a fun game. With these kind of techniques, you can put kids in good moods. And there's something about teaching that in the past we thought it always had to be so serious. I think we sort of learn even better if we're not serious all the time.
It's really neat to be able to kind of get out and beyond and show kids that things are accessible that they maybe never thought. If they really believe and that you believe in them, they will do so much more.
You say, I'm going to be the teacher that the kids remember. You can be that teacher. Why? Brains can change, and that means not just your kids, but it means you can change too.
ASCD's Engaging Students with Poverty in Mind.
Now that might sound like a bit of a commercial, but Eric Jensen is actually a well-regarded researcher when it comes to helping teachers teach students from poverty. He's got a fabulous and famous book out there called Teaching Students with Poverty in Mind. And so that is based upon some of his advice to teachers about engaging these students to keep them active in the classroom. You might have seen my daughter Sarah step in. You're welcome to wave hi. We're going to continue on looking at students with language diversity. So let's continue by looking at language diversity in our students. So by language diversity, I mean students who speak a language other than English. So I thought I'd start with the question of, in which states will you find the most language diversity? Well, if you guessed Western and Southern, you would be correct. This is a nice map of the United States, and you can see the states with the most language diversity are dark blue and medium blue. So you can see where those are typically located. What about the state of Ohio? So I thought I'd show, this is a chart of public school enrollment trend by gifted students, students with disabilities, and English language learners. And although obviously there's a big gap, that English language learners are not a large percentage of our students, it is something that is steadily increasing over time. So here's another question. How many residents in the United States speak a language other than English at their home? So meaning that their primary language is not English. What do you think? Well, if you guessed 1 in 5, you're correct. I don't know about you, but I was a bit surprised by that. I thought that was fairly high and eye-opening. So 1 in 5 residents speak a language other than English. But half of them do report that they do speak English well as well. The majority of ELLs, and ELL stands for English Language Learners, in the public school system speak Spanish. So that's really some good information. If you plan on picking up a language as a minor, Spanish would be your best bet as a teacher in terms of something that would assist you in the classroom. So how does language diversity, students who speak a language other than English, affect student learning? Well, you're going to find they do have different educational experiences, especially if they have immigrated into this country and started schooling in a different country. They might be used to different resources, different ways of learning, different cultural norms within the classroom. You might want to have a talk with these students and their families to get an idea of what their educational background is. to help them acclimate. They may be of low income, and as we've previously seen, there are a lot of needs that go along with low income students that you might be able to assist with. They also tend to have significantly lower test scores. So I provided some data below. This is actually from our textbook. So over here on the left, we have English language learners. On the right, we have non-ELL students. We have 3 different grades, 4th, 8th, and 12th. And you can see in each instance, they're obviously performing much lower than your typical student. They do require more assistance. And you know what? That does make sense because they may not have the English proficiency to understand the questions or the content being asked on these tests. To put yourselves in their shoes for a moment, how would you do on this test? It's kind of difficult when the test questions themselves aren't even in your language, let alone figuring out whether or not you know what the question is about. We're going to be looking at a variety of different types of programs for teaching ELL students. This is a graphic that does show ESL classes in comparison to bilingual, but let's take a moment and go through them. So how do we teach English language learners? You can use a bilingual system. So a bilingual classroom uses both native language and English. So here on the right, I have a depiction of something you might have up in your classroom, a poster that includes both the English and the Spanish. In a bilingual classroom, it's pretty obvious that this does require the teacher to be fluent in more than one language. So it is more difficult for schools to have bilingual classes because that is a specific type of teacher that you would need. It's sometimes given a different name, which is two-way immersion, two-way bilingual, dual language. There's a lot of different names for it, but basically it's when the class is taught in 2 different languages. And the goal of the class is for the students to be bilingual. So your goal is not to just teach them English. It is to help them grow in both languages. Here's a short video looking at bilingual classrooms.
Todos pueden leer conmigo. Juego de plato de monedas. La lección de hoy estaba tratando de trabajar con la estrategia de contar hacia adelante.
We have just 2 languages. 2 languages, English and Spanish.
La clase se divide en 8 estudiantes que dominan el español y 8 estudiantes que dominan inglés.
We're playing a game that we need to close our eyes and then we need to guess how many pennies are under.
Que es una estrategia que se usa para llegar al estándar de Common Core de sumar entre números de 20.
We have to look under and check if it's right.
¿Había 3? Sí. Entonces estamos tratando de alcanzar esa meta para ellos y al darles esta estrategia pueden acercarse más a esa meta. El sistema dual está funcionando muy bien en nuestro salón. 9, 10 es igual a 10. No es difícil hacer, no es difícil alcanzar las metas del Common Core porque ellos en su vida diaria están haciendo ese trabajo, están traduciendo, están tratando de comunicarse simultáneamente en 2 idiomas. ¿Cuántos dedos tiene Miss Prophet? 3.
It helps you learn a lot. Fun.
I think you can see how challenging that must be, but also how beneficial for the students at the same time. Pardon me. All right, so another type of program you can use, bilingual is not the most common, is ESL, or English as a Second Language. So here the instruction is completely in English. This is the most common approach, is probably also the easiest in terms of teacher staffing, and you can include students from multiple linguistic backgrounds. The picture I have down below is actually from a wall on a school at Columbus Global, and their students speak 64 different languages. So what you're going to need to use is visual aids, and when you can, native language to try to help them learn English, but the goal is for them to learn English. Here is a picture from Columbus Global Academy. Again, their students can speak up to 64 different languages. It is an immigration hub, and their classes are taught entirely in English with the hope of transitioning these students to a more traditional school.